right, our next speaker is my favorite moderator, Dr. Chris Hayes. He's one of my main moderators for the Hurricane Bowl. Chris is a professor at USM where he teaches marine pollution, climate change, isotope geochemistry, and paleoceanography. Go ahead and take it away, Dr. Hayes.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Yeah, happy to do this. I've volunteered at the Ocean Sciences Bowl for 5 years now, and it's just awesome and it's fun every year. So I hope you guys enjoy it. So I am going to show a couple things. Let's see. All right. So being an oceanographer, I just love to make maps. So I had to make a map for this of where I've been in my career. But to start at the beginning, I grew up in Connecticut. My dad worked in high schools as a psychologist, and my mom was a minister at a church. Sometimes that's actually called being a PK, or a preacher's kid. And when I tell people this, they often ask how I ever ended up being a scientist with that kind of background. And really, both my parents instilled in me a love of education and of creative activities. And really, as scientists, we have to do these sort of kind of boring things. We replicate experiments, but the ideas behind all those experiments is actually a very creative activity, and you're creating thoughts that maybe no one ever thought before. So it is really a fun career to go into. So from there, I went to college in Montreal. And if you've never been to Montreal, I'll just say it's probably one of the most European places in North America. It was a really cool cultural experience to go there, and not be too far from home as well. And so I was interested in chemistry and philosophy. I wasn't sure what I wanted to major in, but I knew I liked these classes, this material. But I started thinking, how am I ever going to get a job in this kind of stuff? Chemistry, I was thinking maybe pharmaceuticals, I could help with making new drugs, or, in addition to chemistry, I liked making arguments, and I actually thought about law school. There's an interesting area in the law where you have to know about chemistry for the companies that are writing the patents for the new drugs and things like that. But so this was around my second year in college, which was 2006. That was just after Hurricane Katrina, actually, and climate change started to be kind of very in the public eye, and I decided I wanted to sort of use my chemistry knowledge to help with what was going on in the environment. In addition to that, I knew I just loved school. I loved being in school, so I wanted to stay in school as long as I could, and being a professor is a way that you can do that. So I went on to graduate school to get a PhD at Columbia in New York. I worked with an advisor who was interested in ocean chemistry and climate change as I was, and I actually worked with someone whose expertise was in the radioactive elements in the ocean, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So from New York, after my first job was a postdoctoral fellowship in Boston at MIT, and that's where I interviewed and got my job at University of Southern Mississippi. So I moved down to the Gulf of Mexico in 2016. And just on a personal note, we had our first son just last year. And I didn't mention going through this. My wife, I met in college, and we actually moved through all of these different stars on the map together, but not always at the same time. And, I just wanted to say that having a family while going on a career path, you sometimes have some difficult decisions to make, and there's not always any easy answers, but if you can both find what you want to do, you can make it work. And now I get to spend some of my quarantine taking care of our new baby. So that's a lot of fun. But to get into what I'm doing in my lab at Stennis at USM, so I'm using radioactive elements in the ocean. So on the left there is a picture of artificial radiation. That's actually from Bikini Atoll, where they were testing.
Hey, sorry, Chris. I don't mean to interrupt, but I don't know if you shared your screen or not.
Okay.
There it is.
Got it now?
Yep.
All right. Well, see, since you didn't know what I was talking about before, here's that little map, which you probably found in your mind. But so I'm using radiation. That's artificial radiation, that picture of the Bikini Atoll weapons testing that was just after World War II. But there's also natural radioactivity in the ocean, and that's what I'm using. So there's uranium in the ocean. If you've ever heard of radon building up in someone's basement, that's because of the natural uranium in the rocks in the foundation that is decaying. So uranium is decaying into different elements. And one of the elements uranium decays into is thorium. And thorium is a good tracer element. It's it's an exotic element, but it's very insoluble and it doesn't like to be dissolved. So it sticks onto particles. And that's how I connect this with ocean chemistry and climate change. So as you all know, the carbon cycle is heavily influenced by the ocean. About 30% of the fossil fuel CO2 that we release gets taken up by the ocean, and that's a benefit for us. And part of the way that happens is the growth of organic matter in the surface and the sinking of those particles to depth. So finding a way to measure how much carbon sinks that way is really critical in terms of figuring out how much CO2 stays in the atmosphere, how it might change in the future. And the reason we can use thorium is because it has this very well-known input rate. So in a sense, we just look at how quickly thorium gets removed onto the particles, and that tells us how quickly the particles are sinking down to depth. So I'll try another share. Hopefully this doesn't take too long. Okay, so now you've got a little movie. And this is that element thorium I was talking about. With some data from the GeoTraces program I've been working with, Alan actually mentioned that earlier. It's this big global survey, so we go on these cruises across oceans, measure these interesting elements we're interested in, and these are different cross sections plotted where the ships went, and we collected water at different depths. And I actually got to go on some of these cruise tracks, and I made some of the measurements. And the thorium concentration is the color, and just in general, you can see the red colors are higher concentrations, and there's more of that at depth, and that's part of this process of the carbon particles pulling down the thorium down into the deep ocean. And we can get to something important for the global climate cycle. So with that, I'll take any questions. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Chris. Anybody have any questions? Looks like Ella has a question.
What school did you go to in Montreal? I've been there once. What was it like going to school there?
I went to McGill University, which is an English-speaking university, but yeah, Montreal is sort of half French-speaking, half English. But McGill, I could do all the classes in English, but it's helpful to know some French when you're around town.
All right. Anybody have any other questions? Okay. Thank Thank you, Dr. Hayes, for joining us tonight.
Thanks.